All right, we are back. We left off in Exodus chapter, we are somewhere at the end of chapter 20. But we are more going through the notes and going through the marriage covenant at Sinai and really illustrating that and trying to bring that out. And in the notes, it's clearly spelled out. We left off on page 17 in the notes. And I just want to go through the different portions and show you how they line up, okay? But these are the verses that actually the ancient Jewish wedding ceremony was built off of, okay? And their traditions were built off of these things. Exodus 6:8, and I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham. This is the cup and the bride price. Which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. So what is that? So they came up with the cup where you have to actually, the bride has to drink the cup because the Lord was offering. See how it starts is the groom comes and he offers to the father of the bride what he's going to do for her. And what, he's going to have a life and where he's going to work and how he's going to provide for her. And the father is testing and looking at him and hearing his offer. And then he tells the girl his offer. Right? Now, if you get through the father, and he thinks the offer sounds pretty good, right? Then he'll hand a cup of wine, right? He'll pour a cup of wine. He'll hand it grape juice. I'm sorry for wine to the man, right? And he'll drink from it, and then he'll take the same cup and he'll hand it to the girl. She gets the final say. And how she doesn't say anything, but if she drinks from the cup, she's accepted. So then she's handed this cup, and she has to choose whether she wants to drink from it. Okay? And if she drinks from it, then from that point on, all right, now they're going to start, the betrothal has been established. And now, all right, now, you're wondering exactly, how did they get that from that? Well, it comes from, the Lord offered them, to Abraham, you notice in Isaac and Jacob, he offered them an inheritance. Right? He offered them something he would do for them. And they had to accept it. Right? The marriage contract. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. And all the people answered with one voice. Well, the other thing I skipped there, I have to mention, the bride price. Okay, the bride price is very important. Because the Lord, he gave them his offer, but part of his offer was giving them a gift. Right? So the young man, the only way it's kind of survived in our modern, Gentile Western version of it is the wedding ring.
2 months' salary.
Okay? Yeah. I remember I was 17 years old when I got an engagement ring for Jen, and I was working at Sears selling shoes, and it took me a long time to buy that sucker. Let me tell you, it was blood, sweat, and tears. All right? Now I look back on it, and it was like $350, and it was like, so, but then when I was 17, that was a lot of money. All right? That was a big deal. But see, so that's one of the only ways that kind of survives with us. But see, it's a major part of it because he has to do something. He's got to work something. He's got to, right? Anyway, but what he has to offer too, though, he brings a gift. And the father sets the price for the bride. And he has to bring a gift. Now, you're going to see, because you already read to 35, you read this verse already, so I can bring it up. You notice that later on in the sundry laws, which we're going to get to, when it comes to a man seducing a virgin, right? And they're not married is the point. Now, we would say, we would think that, people who have not read the Bible who make assumptions think, well, that means that they're, they committed fornication and they're all going to be killed or go to hell. Well, actually, wasn't God's law. God's law was they're married. But the young man now has to pay a dowry for her. And the father can set it at whatever he wants it to be. He has to pay for her. You think, well, that's what you are. Why? To make the young man give something up. The value. It's all about value. She's valuable. Right? And he's got to give. He's got to, right? So, but you notice in that, you read it, it also had, if he seduces a virgin, and they sleep together, they're married. But there's one way out. If the father of the bride, of the girl, can absolutely not accept him, he can void it. But the young man still has to pay the bride price, but he doesn't get her. He has to pay it anyway. And now let me tell you, it's hefty. All right? Now what is that all about? You say, well, that's chauvinist. Actually, that's protection for women. See, it's value. The Lord, the young man has to actually earn this girl. She's valuable. That's the whole point. All right? That's the picture. But you have to, the father can say, no, you can't have her, but you have to pay anyway. You understand? Anyway, you guys read through that. I think that was in Exodus like 33 or something. If you read up to 35, you should have went over that. Anyway, so I'm just pointing out that's the bride price. Okay, there's a price set, and our modern version of that would be the wedding, the ring. Okay. Anyway, the marriage contract. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, which 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls of peace offerings to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all of these words. What you have to remember is they could have said no. You're wondering, well, why does the Lord hold them accountable for all these things? They could have said no. They didn't have to receive. The people could have said, we don't want the covenant. But once they accepted, they were given the terms. Now, there's another thing in the ancient Jewish wedding, which comes from this too, which is very important. It's called the ketubah. Now, that's part of it. It's actually the conditions and your promises. Now, how that survives actually in our modern Gentile wedding is the vows. Except we have the young man and the young girl make vows. But the point is that the young man comes with his list, his ketubah, his contractual obligations. And it's all written out nicely. And it's part of the covenant. It's a contract. All right? That was part of it. So that part is the Lord gave them his laws. Remember, he spoke all these to Moses. Moses brings them out, reads them to the people, and then they can say yes or no. And they say, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, we accept, right? And then the blood was sprinkled on both of them, and the contract was sealed. And how was covenant sealed? Through blood. Now, if you're wondering, well, how does that matter? You're all, well, mostly adults in this room. I was looking at you, Casey. Anyway, you're old enough for this anyway. You should be. You're wondering, how does that contrast? Well, I know I'm going to be a little graphic for a second. Can we handle that? If there is little children watching this video, please either cover their ears or send them to the bathroom for a second, or just kind of mumble while I'm speaking. Yes, everybody in this room, if you've been through at least high school biology, you've heard of the word the hymen. You know what it is. Okay. Now, I know this is a little graphic, but I'm only doing it because you have to see it, because it's worth this much to get it. Okay? That, because if you're wondering later on too, I have to explain this. So there's really no way around it. You can skip it, but it doesn't answer. Later on, you get to how a bridegroom can accuse his bride as not being pure, but the father of the girl has to come out before the elders and prove her virginity. How would he do that? Right? And you're wondering, how does all that happen? Well, that all comes back to this little word. All right? And of course, you know what it is. Hopefully, if you've been through high school biology, and of course you know that once it's broken, it bleeds. All right? But I want to offer this to you. It has no other reason or meaning. It does nothing else. That's all it does. Would you say that's random chance? So what seals covenant? Blood. So anyway, I know some of you are like, oh, that was so graphic. Well, I'm sorry. But you need to see this. You also need to see God's divine hand in it. Okay, in his design. Then you're wondering, well, what happens if they have an accident, horseback riding, or fell off a building, and can that break then? Yes, it can. Or modern products that are using, if you use them too early, you can do that, which is a modern thing. All right? Well, anyway, the point is that would be carefully documented by the parents, and that would be already set beforehand. And if she was, say, violated or taken, like I said, and that would all be spelled out before, part of the contract. You understand? So that was what that's all about. And we're going to get to that later, and I would have to explain it then anyway, so I'll explain it now. But what I want you to see is God's design. The Lord said the two will become one flesh, a marriage covenant. Right? And of course, that also, you say, well, I've told you right from the very beginning, sex is marriage in God's eyes. It is the most important thing you have to teach young people. It is the most dismissed and destroyed thing in our modern culture. Okay? Many Christians wouldn't even like this. I've had Christians hear me preach this who and were kind of like totally thrown off by me saying that. Well, I've showed you it right from the beginning. Okay? Here's another thing. The Lord says the two will become one flesh. Well, how do they become one flesh? Right? How do they become married? Well, we all know the answer to that question. So they're married. Period. And of course, that's backed up in the New Testament, where the Apostle Paul says in a very another graphic verse, but this is the Bible. You can't get mad at me, okay? But I told you in the beginning that the Bible is rated R. Didn't I? I warned you. All right? That the Apostle Paul is explaining to them about, the members of Christ. He's also explaining the marriage covenant. We are the bride of Christ and all this, right? And we are his members. And you will not take the members of Christ and join them with a prostitute. And he says, don't you know that the two will become one? And that you become one with her. Well, where was he getting that from? Genesis. So he was reiterating again that what? Sex is marriage. Right? And I just, that's very important. Now, I always try to, play both sides because I don't want to also sound like I enjoy getting into the gory details, because let me tell you, I don't. It'd be much nicer to be able to skip some of these things. But they're important to get, and you have to see God's design. But I think the most beneficial thing we can possibly teach people nowadays, because it's the most destroyed, is this. If you really get that in your heart, your whole life will be different. Especially if you're young. If you've already been married for a while, then you get it. But what I'm saying is, for young people, it is the number one most important thing to teach them. Okay? And anyway, it's all through the Bible, and it's the way God designed it to be. And of course, it's what speaks about marriage. When you take that off the table, marriage is destroyed. Marriage doesn't mean much. Well, that's exactly what we've done, right? We're now reaping what the havoc that has caused in our society. Also, whenever I mention this, I always have to then go to the other side. If you are now feeling condemned because you did not have this teaching before and you're thinking about, how many people am I married to? Or, please, you've repented, you've been forgiven by the blood of Jesus, you've been washed, right? The Lord remembers your sin no more. Today is a new day, right? But now you're a believer who lives according to his law, so now you have that in your heart, right? But I always have to say that because, of course, some people will always then be reminded of their past, and I'm not talking about that. But yet, it doesn't change the Word of God, does it? He forgives us and cleanses us, but it doesn't change the truth. But you're going to want to get that so that you can teach that to your children, so you can teach that, and that's how valuable it is. Anyway, I would love to say that there's no more gory details coming in the future, but wait till we get to Leviticus. There's lots of them. Okay, gifts to the bride. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians so that they let him have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. That was the gifts to the bride. The Lord, made them favorably exposed to the Egyptians, and they were given all these gifts, right? And it was enough that every one of them were blessed. So it was not just like it was isolated. It was large. Anyway, we already mentioned that. The mikvah, consecration of the bride. The Lord also said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the third day, for on the third day the Lord will come down to Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." So it was 3 days of washing and preparation and preparing to meet with the Lord, right? And of course, that's where the ceremonial washing comes from, and the ceremonial preparation of the bride before a wedding. Now, even the natural things of life just teach us that, right? Still, even to this day, even if you have not been raised in any of this at all, you still know that a woman needs about 2 or 3 days to get ready for her wedding. My wife wasn't even one who used to take that long, but, even if you say you won't, you will be. So it's just the way it is, okay? Anyway, well, I'm just explaining to you that it's part of God's design, right? Learning of the groom's customs. Now, this was a very important part of it. He gave part of his ketubah was also part of his customs. And things he liked and disliked. And there was a time where the woman would learn what the husband does, what he does for a living, where he comes from, what his customs are, his family traditions are, these kind of things. All right? And they would get to know each other of what they like and what they don't like. Of course, that is what Israel's learning, what the Lord likes and what he hates. Right? And they have to accept that. All right. Then Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "Hear, Israel, the statutes of the ordinances which I am speaking today in your hearing, that you may learn them and observe them carefully. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, with all those of us alive here today." And then we have concealed in the wedding chamber. Now, the ancient ceremony too, you may think a lot of that's, just barbaric. Well, if you have that attitude, you should repent, because this is the Lord's, first of all. But this part of it, you gotta like. The Lord's plan and the Lord's design is that you get 7 days alone to be not bothered at all, which is also kind of where we get the honeymoon from. All right? But you're alone together in this special chamber prepared just for this. And you get 7 days unhindered, as you should say. Right? Actually, and then you're going to see later on in Deuteronomy, part of it, also Jewish law was, Israeli law, I should say, was that also a man would get a year off. A year off just to be with his wife and start his family. All right? So anyway, he would get a year to be excused from the military or any of those things. All right. And sounding of the shofar of the coming groom. Now, how this would commence would be, there was no set date. So we have a set date. They didn't have a set date. all this would be done. They were betrothed, which in the eyes of the law, they were married. Of course, Joseph and Mary, just think of the New Testament, familiar with the Gospels, you see all this in there, right? And the fact is that they had not consummated their marriage. They were in the betrothal period, but they were seen as marriage, and it's still seen as what she did was, committed adultery, right? When they saw her pregnant, right? And they were going to stone her. Remember all that? But Joseph decided to divorce her quietly, to not bring dishonor on her, right? But then Gabriel visited him in a dream and told him that she's, the child is of the Holy Spirit. And of course, Joseph, he isn't in there very much, but the hero of the faith he was, believed. And by faith accepted it and took care of her and helped bring forth the Messiah into the world, didn't he? And it wasn't easy. He went through a lot. Anyway, but you see that part of it there, that they were already considered legally married, even though it had not been fully consummated yet, right? One movie that actually illustrates this really well, even gets a little bit, it's not real detailed, but if you've seen The Nativity Story, it's a great movie. It really is. Some good biblical movies, that's one of the best. And they actually show this whole thing good. That Joseph comes to Mary's father and he speaks to him and brings forth his offer, right? And then the father listens and likes it and then calls Mary in and he pours the wine. He does. It's all there, and he hands it to Joseph, and then Joseph hands it to her, but then he goes away, and they're separated for a while, right? And usually a year. But it could be shorter or longer depending on a circumstance. But what does Joseph then do in the movie? He goes and he builds a house. And that's what they would do. And many times it was built off of your father's house, the house you grew up in, because of course they didn't have their whole separate area. So a lot of times houses would be extended with a separate area built, or on property would be built on top of that, right? I go to prepare a place for you in my father's house with many rooms. All of that was Jesus speaking marriage language that they understood. Because they got this. So Joseph goes and he prepares the house. Now, how it would go for a younger man. Now, Joseph wasn't actually that young. He was a little bit older. Okay? Mary was young. But how it would go is that he would go, he would prep for his house and everything being in order and his apprenticeship. And his father would decide and inspect what he's done and whether he was ready. And when his father thought it was ready, then he would say, okay, go get your bride. And then he would come and then he would send out his witnesses before him, right? And they would say, oh, here comes the bridegroom, and the girl would be ready and she would be taking this time in preparation. Okay? She would be taking this time in preparation, and she'd be learning and she'd be preparing and ready but she had to always be ready. Right? Ready, because the bridegroom could come at any moment. Are you getting Jesus' biblical language here? Right? And when she would come, once he would come for her, then she would come to him, and the marriage ceremony would commence. It was not on a set date. Now, of course, they don't do that anymore in our modern world. They have a set date because we have all this other stuff that we do. But in that culture, and then of course the whole village would have a celebration then. All right. Anyway, but it's interesting that even the groom's father plays a part in it, because he is the one who decides whether this boy's got his stuff in order and whether he's ready for his bride or not. All right, which is a pretty good custom, I think. All right. Anyway, so that is how it goes, and of course it was built off of this, and that's where the sounding of the shofar, the witnesses would go forward and they would blow shofars and say, the bridegroom is coming, the bridegroom is ready, right? And of course Jesus used that whole picture with the 5 foolish virgins and the 5 prudent and the 5 foolish, right? And the bridegroom comes, be ready for him, and then the witnesses come, blow the shofar, the bridegroom is ready, and those that were ready went with them, but those were not ready, right? He was using this whole picture that they all understood. It was common to them. All right. So anyway, that's very important to see. Now, why this is so important, because you have to also see the picture from this point on, how the Lord views Israel as his wife. And you wonder why he's so jealous for them. There's that word again. Because they're his. He made a covenant with them forever. And even to the and when we get to the prophets, you're really going to see that, because it's probably one of the biggest things of the prophets. But you're going to notice right from this point on, the Lord speaks about Israel differently. All right? They're no longer just the sons of Israel, and but they're his. You understand? And it's different. All right, so we went through that. Let's move on. We are finally moving on. But that was a very important part to see. And of course, it absolutely is vital for you to see this, to understand God's reaction to them afterwards. How he reacts when they break his covenant, when they worship other gods, when they dishonor him. Right? And it also explains why he, even through all of it, can never let them go. That's why. Okay? And and of course, it's the contrasted picture as well. Now, you're wondering, where did Paul get his incredible revelation of the bride of Christ in Ephesians 5? And also, it's all the way through there in different pictures. But in Ephesians 5, he comes right out and says it. Right? The mystery of the bride of Christ. That he is a bridegroom and we are his bride. Right? And that Jesus offered us a wedding contract, a marriage covenant. He's getting it from here, and he sees the way everything that the Lord did was to follow this. Okay, even with the custom of, I will not drink from the fruit of the vine again until I drink it with you in the wedding feast. Where's the wedding? Right? So all of that was set up there, and he saw how it came together. And of course, that's how we are the bride of Christ, and that's where it comes from. Now, that's all through Scripture. Of course, it's even in the book of Revelation as well. Right? You have the bride. You have the people who came through the great tribulation, the great harvest. But they're not the bride, separate entity. Right? Those are the ones that were ready, whose lamps were full and ready and waiting for him. Okay. Moving on. So, what time is it? Okay, I got 45 minutes. So, let's go on to... Now we're going to move on to ordinances and cultural law, chapter 21. All right? Now, like I've already said, one thing you have to remember, it's absolutely imperative as you go through Exodus and go through Leviticus, and even other scattered laws through Numbers and Deuteronomy, that you remember the difference between the laws to set Israel apart as their ceremonial law. We'll just use that word. The ceremonial law and the moral law. Okay? We are held to the moral law as Gentile believers. Okay? We are released from the ceremonial law that was for Israel to set them apart from the nations. Right? And another thing I want you to see when we get into this is a lot of the ceremonial law. One of the most important things for you to remember as we get into it is that word holy. To separate. Everything was carefully crafted by the Lord to separate them. Do you know that they stood out anywhere they go? Did they stand out here? Do actual Torah-believing Jews still stand out in modern culture?
Yes.
Of course they do. Now, we live in New York. We have a lot of them who aren't. Right? But the ones, the real Torah-abiding Jews, still stand out. They just can't mix. First of all, they're commanded not to. They're not allowed to intermarry. All right? Now, of course, a lot of them don't follow that one anymore, but the real Torah-believing ones do. So, well, that's harsh. That's wrong. Well, when we get there, we'll spend some time on that. But what I want you to see is everything was carefully crafted to separate them from the nations. Now, here's another picture. Before we get into it, I also want you to see this. What other culture, a nation, has been around for 3,500 years. What is the other oldest culture and tradition? Culture on the planet. See, a lot of people would answer, "Oh, well, China." No, China's only been around for 2,000 years. It goes back to pretty much the Roman Empire as far as the kingdom of China. Before that, they were all splintered groups who fought. All different kingdoms who fought and kings who fought, and it was not a united group at all. You know that? Also, what other people group has lasted and kept their culture and language and original laws and traditions that did not have a land for 2,000 years? How could they have possibly done that? They didn't even have their own country. What happens to every other people group when they get scattered in to another country? What happened? They get assimilated and they lose everything. They lose their language, they lose their culture. It takes 100, 200 years, right? And that's exactly what happens. But of course, God, in His wisdom to separate Israel, a lot of the things are carefully crafted to always force this thing where they have to stick out and be separate from everyone else. And because of that, they were able to withstand still being around and holding on to their culture for 3,500 years. Even 2,000 of them being without a country. All right? Because these were so carefully crafted to separate them. The kosher laws themselves do it. Circumcision does it. The way they have to dress does it. And many, many other things. Right? Okay, so that's just a couple things to keep in mind before we really get into it. All right, now, of course, right here in chapter 21, there's some moral things. But also a lot. Now, here's another thing to remember, which is extremely important. That this is, and we're wondering, you're going through some of these laws, and you're wondering, why about all this? Well, how many laws do we have? You think, oh, it's all just law, everything is law. We're under grace, we're not under law. Okay, well, think about this. Let's just say we're here in Port Ewan right now. How many laws exist in Port Ewan?
Volumes.
Yeah. Would you say there's more than 10?
Yeah.
Would you say there's more than 50? Would you say there's more than 100?
Yes.
Yes. What would Port Ewan be like if there was no law at all?
Kingston.
Tell me, that was funny. What are places like where there's no law in this world? Are they nice places? Are they places that you'd want to visit in vacation? No. So the point is, we're not opposed to law. We actually like law. Mankind needs law, don't we? Right? So here's another thing you have to remember is part of this as well, as you're going through the book of Leviticus especially, and at the end of Exodus here, you have to remember that the Lord is establishing a society. Our society has thousands and thousands of laws. Don't we? So that our society will work. So the point here is that, and it doesn't work great. All right? But this was carefully crafted. This is all a theocracy. All right? And what is a theocracy? Obviously, a theocracy is as opposed to a democracy. Okay? Well, we're not even a democracy. We're a republic, but whatever. We should know that. The point is that a theocracy is established on a belief system. Right? This is not a free, vote and, everyone does what they, like when we get to the book of Judges, one of the key phrases, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Right? Well, see, because they did not fully adhere and establish a theocracy. A theocracy is a religious system and belief system that governs everything. Right? There's so many laws in a society itself. Everything, so it's not just them giving them a couple moral laws to understand God. It's also crafting their whole society from the ground up. Okay? And just like you think of, just if you looked at the laws of Port Ewan, New York, it'd probably be this thick. Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, in contrast, this is God's law given for the society that He desires. This is God's society. Now, even the things that are ceremonial that may not exactly adhere to us, still seeing the wisdom and the heart of God in them is vital for us to know Him. Right? So it's still important for us to see it and to get why and His heart behind it. Because He is crafting this society from the ground up. The way He wants it. And He has a reason for everything. Does God do anything random? No. Alright? So everything is carefully crafted. Every little detail is laid out. There's nothing that is left, no stone left unturned. Another thing I want you to see too, if you're wondering, is one of the biggest things to remember when it comes to God's law and God's society is this. There's one thing in every ancient culture and every modern culture, there was one thing that every other society and all of mankind had except for Israel. Jails, prisons, dungeons. Guess what Israel does not have? Jails, prisons, dungeons. God's society carefully does not have it. Because there is a penalty already spelled out for every given thing. And it's all laid out. So everybody has the penalty, and you do this is the repercussion. And the Levites are their job, we're going to get to it when we get to the golden calf, and then the Levites stand up and they're chosen to be priests instead. And then it becomes their job, is what the book of Leviticus is to the Levites. It's the Levitical law. And it's their job to uphold it in the society. All right? So the point of it is, though, that everything is spelled out with this is what it is and this is the repercussion. There's no prisons. You either pay back, and here's your penalty. So you're wondering, if you do this, you have to pay back 10 times. Even think of, Zacchaeus, when the Lord comes to his house and he says, "Here I am, Lord, and if anybody I've cheated him, I'll pay back, 10 times the amount." He was actually just following Levitical law for stealing. Because that's in here. Because you read through it about a thief. If they're caught, and you also see if a thief breaks in at night, a man has every right to hit him, and if he dies, he is free from any guilt, because you should not have entered a man's house at night, right? Right? But if you enter during the day, now you're wondering, what does that mean? I mean, if he enters with a weapon, meaning to harm, that's a different story. But if he gets caught stealing something in your house in the middle of the day, but he's not a danger, right? And the point is, you can clearly see him. What is the night thing? You can't see at night, can you?
Right.
First of all, they don't have light bulbs. They have little lamps. You can't take the time to investigate what the person's doing. Right? So, but even in that, everything is carefully spelled out. Then he has to be brought in charge, and then he has to pay back 10 times what he's stolen. And even if he can't, then he has to sell himself, right, to pay off his debt. There is a careful and completely covered and prescribed punishment for everything. Thus, there's no need for prisons. All right? Now, what is it all about? First of all, that weeds out corruption. Now, it doesn't completely get away from corruption. The Lord goes on and on and on about corruption and being fair, right? But when you have jails, you can kind of in jail, this person go in jail, this person goes death. This person, you kind of... But no, everything is exactly laid out and prescribed and already set in stone. They don't get to make it up who gets to do this and whose punishment. They don't make up punishments. They're already prescribed. The Lord took that out of their hands. In every other culture, man makes up their their punishments and what they think for this person and what they think for this person. Many times it depends on their situation and their financial situation and who they are. Right? Well, no, not in God's society. Everything has a punishment and a penalty, and everything is spelled out already, and it's equal to everybody. Right? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, doesn't the Bible say if someone gets caught stealing, even if they're starving, you have to cut off their hand? Guess where that comes from? The Quran, written by one man in 500 AD, 500 years after Christ. Remember that. This was written in 1500 BC. And the Lord even distinguishes in this between the man who has nothing and the man who has. And there actually is provision for mercy for the man who has nothing. And the whole society is geared towards the poor. They have to let the poor come and eat in their fields. They have to let poor people come into their property and be able to take food. They can't take it in baskets, because that would be them stealing and selling. And it's all clearly spelled out. But if a poor man comes into your property, an orphan or widow comes in and he's eating the apples off your apple tree in your orchard, you have to let him eat and live. And you're not allowed to go over the second gleaning. You're only allowed to do it once, and then you have to leave it for the poor, the orphan, the alien, and the widow can come and eat and live. There's no other society in human history that had anything like that. So the Lord even distinguishes between the person who steals out of starvation and who's desperate. Because the Lord knows us. You know, if a person is starving and they're about to die and they steal, is different than a person who has plenty and steals. Right? Yep. But see, in God's society, there's provision for the poor already. You understand? But I love how that's even thrown there. Everything is carefully spelled out. Now you're wondering. Now there's a greater depth of it also when it comes to in Leviticus. We're going to go through a lot more of it. But you also let me just go over some of my favorites here, and then we'll do that. I'm not going to go verse by verse. That would take forever. I'm just going to throw out some of my favorites because I'm a teacher and I get to do that. All right? But that's really, I just try to figure out something that show God's heart. It all shows God's heart. When you really get it, that the Lord is, see, some people are like, oh, it's all law. Well, you know how much law, I mean, we have so much, you know how many laws we have in America? We have like entire libraries devoted to law. Isn't that true? All right. But another thing I want to carefully explain to you is one of the number one most taken out of context or twisted verses in all of the Bible is, thou shalt not kill. Because the Lord carefully and in a detailed manner, I should say, describes the difference between killing and murder. First of all, he said, even back with Noah, they talked about, right, who sheds man's blood, by man his blood will be shed. So what about the guy who wants to dispense the justice? Because somebody's got to do it, right? So did God prescribe an executioner? Yes, he certainly did. Actually, the men of a society should be the ones who should take care of that. It's a terrible task, but a necessary one, because of the wickedness of man. Right? Anyway, but the Lord carefully gives us a description of the difference. And like I said, everything is very clear and spelled out. Let's look at 21 verse 13. We'll go back to 12. Actually, there's so many good parts. I mean, what am I skipping? Let's go back to, even when it comes to laws concerning servants and all of that. Everything is carefully spelled out. And one thing you have to remember when you're dealing with a lot of that, you're wondering about, you have to keep in mind that jobs, we live in a society built on jobs. Right? But see, most of, 95% of jobs and the workforce and provision came from working for some rich guy as his servant. Okay? Which is exactly the same thing that we do now, by the way. We just call it something else. But you work for a company, you are a servant of some rich guy. That's exactly what you are. Isn't that true? Yeah. So you have to keep that in mind, because we deal with a lot of this and we're like, oh, that's so barbaric, you know. But we forget, no, so you were there, and if you didn't have this great inheritance or great, you know, you'd be selling out to be a servant somewhere, and you'd be looking for the best possible. And if you had a master who was actually a good guy and you'd want to stay. You had a good situation. And of course, the Lord is the one telling them to take care of them, and the Lord is the one who gave them rights. If you abuse them, then you have to let them go on account of you abused them. Right? Or, and it all has to be spelled out for what they did. And if he served you this amount of time, then the Lord puts in every 7 years, you got to let him go free. And then if he has a daughter born in your house, what to do then? And even then, it's prescribed that if you want to take her as a wife for yourself or for one of your sons, you cannot treat her as a slave or a servant. She is a daughter in your house or a wife, and she has the full rights of that. Who put all that in here? The Lord. Everything is perfectly prescribed. But if you know that if you are displeased with her, then you have to let her go free. Right? And if a man serves and he wants to serve and he wants to stay, and the Jubilee comes and he's free to go according to the law of Israel, the law of God, I should say. But he wants to stay, then he can come back and say, I want to stay, I love this. And then he'll pierce his ear with a special marking of that house. And he will be a servant, and his family will serve that house. All right? There's really no difference between that and you working, giving yourself to a company. It's how you provide for you and your family. All right? So if you get that, this makes a lot more sense to you. But it's so easy for us to do the thing. Remember, things to remember when studying Torah. I always try to, because we'll always get that judgmental attitude, and you got to get rid of that. All right? How many people did Abraham have serving him? I mean, he had 300 and something men born in his house trained for war, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And we kind of think of him as a couple of rich guys going around in tents, and we forget, no, he had a whole city that worked for him. They were servants in his house. But you know what? They wanted to stay. Why? Because they liked serving Abraham. It was a good gig. Right? So that's how it works. Anyway. So there's carefully prescribed laws for all of that, fairness and the rights of each one of them and how it works. So let's look at let's work with verse 9. See, even in verse 8, we'll go back to 7. And if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of the master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. Now, what does it mean, selling her to be a slave? You're thinking, how can that be? Again, we are from a society blessed by the gospel, and we have no idea what real being poor is. There is no difference than, many of us are enslaved to credit card companies and stuff, but we just don't think about it that way. But that's exactly the same thing. That's exactly what we are. We have to work 3 jobs just to pay off our slavery debt. Isn't that true? Our mortgage means death grip. That's what it means. All right? And we have to do everything to pay off this debt. That's what we're slaves to it. Isn't that true?
Slave to the lender.
Right? So the point here is that many of them, if they're poor, they had nothing, they would sell themselves, for provision. It was better to be a slave in a house with provision than a destitute person on the street. You see how that works? So in our culture, that has been done away with, but in this society, it isn't. You can't just say, well, they should have. No, well, see, it's just, you can't take our culture and judge that one. All right? And that's what a lot of people do. Because even Paul mentions, slaves and masters, doesn't he? Yes, he does. Okay. But if you follow God's way in it, it's honoring and loving is what God really focuses in on. So what is this saying right here? It's saying that he can't treat this girl as I'll just say it flat out, as a sex slave. If he takes her, then that's it. She's a wife. She's not a servant or a slave. She has full authority and rights as a wife. That's what he's saying right here. So we'll look at that as, oh, that's horrible. But actually, it's the exact opposite. It's giving the woman, fair treatment is what it's doing. That he can't just treat her however he wants her. Right? That if he's going to take her, then he can't treat her as a servant or slave anymore. She is now a wife. Does everybody get that? But you see how if you look at that from the wrong perspective, you can think that that's horrible. Right? Okay, verse 9. And if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food. So if he takes another wife, he can't mistreat her. Will God put this in as a societal law? Yes, he would. Okay? If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. Is that in there? Yeah, it is. So, would God even put that in as a law? Yes, he would. All right. Now, we remember that with, you had Rachel and Leah, right? They were going back and forth. The Lord could have put that in there. So, Leah had to buy Jacob with her mandrakes. Remember that? Okay. Verse 11, and if he will not do these three things for her, then he shall go out for nothing without payment. He will let her go free. Completely. All right? Verse 12, he who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him, underline, circle, highlight. God let him fall into his hand. Then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee, and that's where we get manslaughter. And when we get to the book of Leviticus, we're going to get a very detailed description of this. And we're even going to get it when it even comes to rape. There's a very detailed description of the man who lies in wait, or the one who, the difference really being consensual or not, right? And also here, when it comes to, what this is, let me start again, because I'm tripping over my words here. Lying in wait means forethought. Murder one, or manslaughter. Those are what our laws are based on, by the way. Now, what is manslaughter? Was not intent to kill. Right? And there's different degrees of that. And, of course, murder one is forethought. Intent to kill. Right? Murder. That's what it is. So it also even goes into if two guys are fighting, and they're both fighting, but one of them strikes him and the guy and he falls dead, but there was not intent to murder, but God lets it happen. Then when we get to Leviticus, you're going to see that it has two men chopping down a tree in the woods. But an axe head slips off. If we work construction, we have all kinds of laws, but just imagine, building some of these crazy things without any of that. Do you think some men died building some of them things? Yeah. They certainly did, didn't they? Right? Construction sites can be dangerous now. So, two men are chopping wood in the field, and an axe head slips off, and God lets it happen. Remember, going back to what I explained to you of God's permissive will and God's ordained will. But see, it's still the same. Is the Lord let the man die, the Lord willed it. Doesn't mean he purposed it to happen, but he didn't intervene. Right? I've already carefully explained that, but you see why I had to. So, right here, he's saying, but God let it happen. So then, that's used to illustrate that the man is guiltless because it was not intent to kill. And that's where manslaughter comes from. And the Lord then gives him cities of refuge, and he mentions it over and over and over again. And it becomes a major part of their society. And they each have to have in each tribe 3 cities of refuge where the manslayer or could go and live free. Why? Because of people wanting to take vengeance and not being able to be around. All right? All was designed to keep from innocent blood being shed. Because the Lord clearly illustrates that there's sometimes accidents happen and people die, right? And the clear distinction between malice or forethought and an accidental death. Two men are fighting and they both are willfully fighting and they're beating each other's brains out. You can't just blame the one guy if he wins and the other guy falls dead, or if he trips and smacks his head on the rock. He chose to fight, right? So, in that case, it has to be carefully investigated. So in this, the Lord puts provision and a punishment for everything. But malice or forethought, obviously, is the death penalty instituted by God. So if you have a problem with the death penalty, you have a problem with God. Whoever shed man's blood, right, by man his blood will be shed. Now, of course, then the Lord gives a clear description of that murder, distinct between murder and killing. Because what about the guy who does the killing, and what about a soldier? Right? Or what about a self-defense? Right? So, and that is all carefully explained. Now, you know how many Christians will use "thou shalt not kill" as an anti-war slogan?
Right.
I mean, say that to David. Or say that to, to Adolf Hitler. You think God liked the fact that America didn't go fight? No. The Lord had to get us involved, didn't he? Yes, he certainly did. So those things are clear. And of course, you're going to get even the description between wartime and peacetime. David even makes a clear description. He's saying, shedding a man's blood in peace and shedding a man's blood in war are not the same thing. Provided the war is justified. And of course, that also is a moral choice of each man, whether he's fighting for a good cause or not. Because just because you're a soldier doesn't mean that you're fighting for the right side. And that is your moral obligation to check that out, isn't it? But is there times where man needs to fight? Until the Lord Messiah reigns, there will be evil men who will need to be fought. We're guaranteed. If there's one guarantee, we're guaranteed that. Okay? But anyway, I just want to show you that it's all carefully prescribed and laid out. And it's a societal law from the ground up. All right? And of course, it explains them two men are fighting with his fist, and he does not die, but remains in bed. If he gets up and walks outside his stab, then he who struck him shall go unpunished. Right? And shall take care of him until but his obligation is to make sure the guy gets healed, is nursed back to health. That's his job if they fought, and So the Lord says, okay, fine, he didn't die, but now you have to help him get better and take care of him. Right? And if, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken for his... Anyway, it's all carefully prescribed of what to do. All right. And even mentions a woman being struck who's pregnant, being a murder. Wow. Well, in fact, so God sees a baby in utero as being murder, if it's killed? Yeah, he does. Okay. So, and you look even, another thing. There's another law that just comes up right here in 2021, a major law that we have whole books in just America written on. It's called criminal negligence. Right. You know what criminal negligence is? It's if you purposely are neglectful and allow a dangerous situation for someone to get hurt or killed in. Meaning, coming from Leviticus, they had to build a house, you have to build a parapet around. So if you make an area where it's open and someone falls and dies, you are supposed to cover that. Right? Or if, and here the description is here with an ox. And even down to how your animals are is carefully prescribed. Because guess what an ox can do? Can an ox kill a man? Sure. Yeah, it certainly can it? Right? So if your ox has gored someone, then you have to take appropriate measure. If he does it again, then you're responsible. The first time you're not. Now you have to take precaution. If an animal kills a man, then you have to kill the animal. All right? You say, well, the animal didn't know what it was doing. Why does God do that? God does that. Of course, it's all about innocent blood. That's what it's about. Without the shedding of blood, right? And also because if this animal is a danger, by letting it live, it could hurt someone else. See, God knows, if an ox gored this guy and killed him, guess what chance? If the ox gets another man around, would you think the ox is going to chance to gore him again? Yeah, right? So it needs to be put down. Like, of course, we have those kind of laws now, but now we have the whole, I should say, greenie crowd is what I like to call them, now trying to, if we have, right here, we have black bears. I have black bears in my house, but if one hurts someone or comes in someone's house or attacks somebody or kills somebody, then the DEC will hunt it down and kill it. Now, is that what a loving society would do or not? Would a loving society let the bear live, or would it put it down? What would a loving society do?
Kill it.
Put the bear down, right? Because it's a danger. Isn't that true? Okay. So that's the point. And you see that all laid out here. And it's criminal negligence. And if the guy, then he already gored someone, and he doesn't do anything with oxen to gore somebody else, now he's responsible. Right? And he has to make restitution for the person however he can, and if the person died, now he's responsible for their death. So all of it is laid out. Thus the reason for no prisons, because there is a clear and descript penalty for everything laid out. Alright? And if a man makes a pit but doesn't cover it up or have any warning signs and someone falls into it, he's liable. That's criminal negligence. Right? Okay. Now, what is this all about? This is all about a loving society. All of it is. You think, oh, well, all this rules and law. Well, do we have criminal negligence laws? Yes. We have all the same things based on this. Okay. And of course, even clearly defined now in chapter 22, even about a theft, and the difference between a person in need and a person all right, and how there's that, and how they make restitution, how they repay, okay, and what they're held accountable to. Death is not a penalty for theft. You have to make restitution. You actually pay you could say a penalty, like it's like multiple times as much as what you stole, and you're held accountable to pay that. All right, and if not, you have to sell yourself to pay off your debt. Okay? And of course, then it even gets into whether an animal kills another one, or whether a person was torn to pieces, and have to show the evidence of how it happened. It has to be carefully investigated. Why? Because innocent blood must all be accounted for. The Lord cares about innocent blood. Blood cries out to him from the ground, right? So there always has to be a careful, detailed examination of innocent blood. Okay. And even if a man borrows, this, he must give it back to him. It's all he has to sleep in. And of course, Jesus said the same thing, about a man's tunic, about what a man wears. Also, the Lord's law is the Lord put in Jewish law, or I should say Israeli law, that if a man works for you, you pay him that day. You got to pay him before the sun goes down, because that's all what he has to live on. And the point is that so he feels he earned his wage for the day. It's like, why would the Lord even put that in there? Because everything is carefully laid out, right? And in verse 16, if a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and lies with her, he must pay a dowry for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, which of course is love. So you could say, without this part, that could be a horrible law. What if this guy's a total, immature, I was going to say something meaner, but what if he's a total immature, unfit to be a husband and a father? Is there any men like that? Yeah, I think there is, right? If you didn't have the second part, verse 17, that would be a horrible law. But see, God's love is interjected into it. Whose responsibility is it to make sure his daughter's taken care of? Exactly. So it's put on the father as he's responsible. So because the young girl could be tricked by this guy. So verse 17, if her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the dowry for virgins anyway, but he doesn't get her. All right? So then the father will make the final decision whether this man is fit for his daughter or not. Okay? And of course, 18, you shall not allow sorcerers to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall utterly be destroyed. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, but they must love their neighbor as herself in Leviticus 4. We'll get to that. You shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict him at all, and if he does cry out, I love this. This is one to circle. And it comes up even, there's greater details on this one. It comes up a lot in the book of Leviticus. If you afflict him at all, and if he does cry out to me, I will surely hear his cry. So the Lord is now also telling him that I hear the cries of the innocent and the rejected and the hurting. And if they cry out to me against you, I will hear them. You will answer to me. That's what the Lord is saying. All right? So he's also charging the men of the society to care for widows and orphans. It's their responsibility to care for them. All right? If you afflict him at all, and if he cries out to me, I will surely hear his cry, and my anger will be kindled, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widow, and your children fatherless. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. You're not allowed. You have to lend without interest. Think about that. Well, what happens when you just start lending money at interest? It's called a loan shark. Or a mortgage company. Right? So the point is, though, debt itself. Right? And creating debt. And that's how societies, you continually lend and you take control and you end up owning everything. That was completely legal. And in Israel, after every Sabbath year, you had to cancel all debts. So you had to write it all down. And then you're going to see later on, he also tells them, and you can't make deals based on how long until the Sabbath is. You can't say, okay, well, the Sabbath is coming up, so I can't do this deal, because you have to actually still do it all fairly anyway. Only the Lord would do that. No man would come up with this. So you have to see the underpinning is the love of God, the heart of it. And that's why even as believers, if we're not, what I also want to tell you is, remember, you should be familiar with this, because this is going to be the law of Messiah. For 1,000 years on this earth, he will rule and reign, and the laws are already written. This is, and some Christians hear people, have heard me say that. I've seen people before be like, what? Yeah, you mean this is coming back? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay. There's so many. I'm just picking out my favorites here. The chapter 23. So many good ones. I can't get too deep. I go too deep and then I won't finish. Verse 5. The truth is, I like all of them. 23 verse 5. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying helpless under its load, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. Now, think about it. We even think we're so righteous as Christians, but which one of us would do this for somebody that hates us? Go the extra mile to help him out when he hates us. See, that still goes against us in every way, doesn't it? But the Lord says, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall surely release it with him. You shall not pervert justice due to your needy brother in his dispute. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent or the righteous, for I will not acquit the guilty. And you shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of the just. And you shall not oppress a stranger, since you yourselves know the feelings of a stranger, for you also were strangers in the land of Egypt. Verse 10, and you shall sow your land for 6 years and gather in its field, but on the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the needy of your people may eat. Only God Okay, I just lost my place. I do that on a regular basis. Okay. And whatever they leave the beast of the field may eat, you are to do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. Now, is that good business? They actually have to let strangers come onto their property and can't do anything about it. Only God. See, our society is the exact opposite. But, in an agricultural society, they had to allow them to come in and eat and just let them go, let them be. That's what, if you look at the book of Ruth is based on that. Deborah and Ruth live off the gleanings. They have nothing else. Okay. Verse 12, 6 days you are to do your work, but on the seventh day you shall cease from labor in order that the ox and your donkey may rest, and your son and your female slave, as well as your stranger, may refresh themselves. Everybody gets a day off. Now concerning everything which I have said to you, be on your guard, and do not mention the name of other gods, nor let them be heard from your mouth. Verse 19, you shall bring the choice first fruits of your soil into the house of the Lord your God. You are not to boil a kid in its mother's milk. Now, that one comes up twice. And this is where, I have to mention this one because this is where the whole no meat and cheese things come from. In Israel, one thing you won't find is a cheeseburger. McDonald's has burgers without cheese.
Ew.
Yes. They see, cheese and meat together as boiling a animal in its mother's milk, which is mentioned twice. Okay? Well, because they didn't really use cow milk, they used mostly goat milk. All right? And so that's where, now that was, the rabbis took this and then came up with that. Doesn't necessarily mean that. Okay? But anyway, that's where it comes from if you're wondering. The kosher laws, they do no cheese and meat together. They have cheese on bread, cheese on bagels, cheese spreads, but they no cheese on meat. Okay? We do bacon and cheese on meat.
Meat without cheese.
Right? Anyway. But you see, that's where it comes. But you can understand where they got that from. So I reserve all judgment because I don't know. I'm just telling you the facts, okay? Now, if you're wondering, are you allowed to have bacon cheeseburgers? Go back to Acts 15, okay? Oh, it's 9:32. Okay, we'll stop here. Now, if you're wondering, I know I didn't seem to get very far, but I established a lot of things. Now we're going to move at this pace. We just went through a couple chapters quickly. We're going to move through the laws at this pace. We're not going to go through every one of them. All right? I'm just going to throw out some of my favorites. And then, but like I said, for chapter like 27 to like 33, we're going to pretty much skip. All right? Because all the furnishings of the tabernacle, we're going to look at some of the things over here in the notes, some of the basics, but we're not going to dive into all of that. So we're going to make up ground in places, even Leviticus and some of that, when it comes to the way the altar and the cut stones and all that kind of stuff. We're going to really quickly move over those things. All right? So we're not going to be going at a super slow pace. We're really going to be moving a lot faster. But I had to establish an opening to the law so that you have the right frame of mind as you're going through it. Okay, so I had you read to 35, so I want you to read, just finish Exodus. Okay, it goes to 40, so finish Exodus. Like I said, we're going to skip probably 6 or 7 chapters in it. So we'll pick it up there next week. Okay, good night, good evening.